First off, to this one. The first thing I want to flag with you is that we are having, this is a little bit of an aside before I get into the content. In the schedule of the day, and I'm going to show you the schedule a little bit later, we started this last year and we introduced a student panel. And on that student panel, students came together, only about 4 or 5 students came together, and they talked about their research. They answered a couple of questions like, you know, how did you come to your research? What was the research experience like? What advice might you give to a younger student coming through, about to embark on their research? And that research, that student panel is chaired by our Vice President Research in the Students' Union here in UL. So what I'm putting out there to you for today, for those of you who are external to UL, so we have some UL reps already, but for those of you external to UL, we're still looking for about 2 students who would be interested in participating on that student panel. So I've left details here. So Kieran Gowrie is the name of our academic Vice President in the Students' Union here in UL, and Kieran will be chairing the session on the day. So obviously Kieran was a student last year and he's moved into a Students' Union post this year. So if you would like, and if you would like to consider even over the course of this presentation, if you want to ask some questions afterwards, if you would like to consider putting yourself forward, Kieran's email address is there, studentacademic@ul.ie. And if you want to drop him a line, just tell him that you'd be interested. Drop in the presentation of your work. So it's for people who are presenting live on the day of Aicur, that are eligible to be part of the student panel. Okay, so we'd be really interested and really delighted if people were willing to put themselves forward to have that conversation. It's very informal. It's, as I said, it's very conversation based, and it's a nice feature to the conference because this conference is about students' work. So onwards. The options that you have to showcase your research in Aicur 2023, as you are aware from filling in your abstract submission form, there are kind of 5 key areas that people have chosen when it comes to presenting their work. The first one is to present your work live on the 13th of April. The second is to submit a recording. The next is a live performance, which again would be on the 13th of April. Also, a recorded performance is accepted, and also we have poster submissions as well. So the majority of presentations this year are live presentations, which is absolutely fantastic. And then so as a breakdown, we have the majority live presentations, we have a good quantity of recorded presentations, and we have a number of posters as well, a smaller number of posters. We don't actually have any live or recorded performances this year. So I'm going to focus this work in on looking at the presentation, the poster prep that you're going to be considering. So couple of pointers in relation to your 10-minute presentation, okay? And this is probably more so in relation to the live presentation. So a lot of students will use slides and like to use slides to guide their audience through their research, but it's not, you know, it's not a mandatory thing. It's a choice of yours. As I said, it's comfort, you know, what you're most comfortable with. What is necessary on the day when it comes to live presentation is that you make sure that your camera is good quality so that you can be seen, so that your slides can be seen if you're using them, but also make sure that your audio is good. Okay, so if it's something that you haven't tested in a little while, or if you've moved location and you're not 100% sure how good your bandwidth is, please do a test of that just to make sure that you can be heard and that you can be seen, because I suppose you've put the effort in, and we want to make sure that we can hear you and see you clearly as well. So the presentations on the day will be recorded, a little bit like here, just in the slot that you're in, it'll be recorded. So we don't record the questions and answers part of your session, but we do record the presentation. Now, some people might not want that to happen. They might not want the recording put onto the website after the fact, and that's absolutely 100% fine. If it's a case that you don't want your recording hosted on our webpage after the fact, all you have to do is contact ctl@ul.ie. So that's the email address that has been corresponding with you up until now. You'll be familiar with that. Drop them a line, just say, don't want my recording to be hosted on the website, and that's absolutely no problem at all. Okay, so what are the key pieces that you're looking at when it comes to both the live and the recorded presentation. You're looking at your time allocation, okay? You have a set amount of time. Keeping within the time allocation is really important on the day for the actual running of the day, and not to go over your time, but also, I suppose, to practice and to stage the different parts of your presentation so that you hit your time allocation. The key message. What is the key message that you want to get across to your audience? Bear in mind that your audience on the day might have an understanding or an insight into the area that you're studying, but similarly, they may not. And we very purposely mix the research presentations within the breakout room that you'll be in. There'll be very different subject matter in that area, and we do that purposely. And the reason that we do it is that we find that undergraduate students, for understandably, spend most of their time exposed to and familiar with the content of the program that they're studying. So by putting you into a mixed session, it means that you get an exposure and you get insight into other people's research, into research from other programs, either in your own institution or in other institutions, okay? So when you are putting your work together, bear in mind that the audience that you'll have on the day, the other panel members and whoever's attending your session, won't necessarily be familiar with your program area, won't necessarily be familiar with your topic. So you need to consider the language you use, and you try and I suppose pitch the presentation knowing that the audience is not a specialist in the area that you're in. Okay. From a timing point of view, this kind of links back to your time allocation. Avoid rushing your content. So less is more. Make sure that you can talk, at a reasonable pace, and try not to put in loads and loads of content to get through it. Spend a bit of time making your content quite concise, so that something that you might have written and it might be a paragraph, you can actually summarize that into 2 sentences when you're presenting it orally. And similarly, as I've said there, if you're using slides, do avoid large chunks of text on your slides. So what the slides are there, they're really there to prompt you. They're there to prompt you, and you fill the story in around what's on the slides, okay? So the slides are the prompt and you fill in the story, as opposed to the slides being the story and you just reading the slides, okay? So next. General structure of your presentation: introduce yourself and the title of your presentation or your study. Outline the presentation from the point of view of what it is you're going to share with your audience. Present your work, I suppose, in a logical manner, in a similar way to the way that you would have undertaken the research. Set out the research questions, set out your methodology, and set out your key findings, okay? In your conclusion, you can remind people of the key findings. You can reflect, and that's actually a really nice insight piece when it comes to your presentation. What did you learn from the research? What else would you have done if you had time? Were there any limitations to the work? And would there be future recommendations, or would there be a next step that you would take in the research if you had more time? Leave with an impact if you can at all, and you can include a references slide at the very end of your work. Okay, so structuring the presentation, as I've said, it's that idea of having a beginning, a middle, and an end that you bring people through. When you were actually physically presenting, obviously this is completely in an online context. For some people that adds nerves, for some people it completely takes away nerves. It very much is dependent on who you are as an individual. But what I would say to you there is, no more than the cat and the lion there. Be confident in sharing your work, because it's your work and you know it best. This is a very friendly conference. There'll be a chair in the session that you're in who will introduce you and who will facilitate questions and answers. And all of those people are faculty members who teach students, work with students, research with students, and they're very student friendly. The idea of this conference is to give you an experience. It's to allow you share your work and talk about your work. So there's nobody here to catch you out. There's nobody here to catch you out with questions. So it's very much, your platform to share your work, and, try and enjoy that experience and try and enjoy the fact that you have this opportunity to talk about it. Take a deep breath before you start to speak. That's just a calming kind of a mechanism. Avoid reading content as best you can. Obviously, in an online setting, it's probably easy. If you've got two screens, you can use the second screen. If you don't have two screens, you can have some notes in front of you. If you know your work, well enough and you're confident enough with it, just talk to the slides or talk through what it is that you have. As I said, you know your work best at this stage. Engage with the audience online. That is best done by looking into your camera. So wherever your camera, be familiar, I suppose, with where your camera is on your machine, and whether it's a laptop or however you're going to be communicating. I suppose have an awareness about what looking down the camera is like with a view to having optimum engagement. In relation to recorded presentations, then. We communicated with you last week in relation to the date that they were due, and we would ask that you provide them again to the ctl@ul.ie address and in .mp4 format. That's just for ease of uploading. Okay, so that's our presentation piece. In relation to the poster piece, for people who might be providing and contributing a poster, it's important with a poster. Now, this is a poster should be readable from about 10 feet away. That's probably more for a poster when it's being displayed at a physical conference. But the premise is similar. The idea is that the content is not packed and crowded and there isn't an awful lot of it. That again, key messages might be in graphics and might be in color, and that they almost lift up off the page, and the key findings and the methodology, the question from your research is obvious. The title is short and it draws interest. The word count on a poster is only about 300 to 800 words. Text is clear and to the point. Use bullets and numbering and headlines to make it easier to move through the poster and to understand the process of the poster. Graphics obviously are key in a poster, again, to draw the reader in and to make the research easily understood. Be consistent and have a clean layout, and definitely include acknowledgements of your name and your institution on posters. Sometimes people submit their posters with all their work on it and they've got their title, but they don't put their own name and their own institution on it. So indeed, remember to do that. There's kind of three important questions, I suppose, that you can use as prompts when it comes to putting a poster together. So what's the most important feature or fact or finding from your research project? How can you represent that visually and in the most effective way for your audience? And what kind of information can I convey that will complement my poster? And that again is more like for an in-person poster presentation where you'd be standing alongside your poster, which you won't be in this situation. If there are so I've put in a hyperlink there to examples and more information of posters if anybody wants to have a look, just to get maybe a little bit of inspiration around their poster and the approach they're going to take from a layout point of view. So, final check when it comes to your work. Remember to put your name and your presentation title on the title slide. I know that seems incredibly obvious, but it's one of those things that sometimes people forget to do. Check the spelling and the grammar. And to be honest with you, I find the easiest thing to do in that situation when I'm in your shoes is to get somebody else to cast their eyes over it, because when you're very close to your own work, it can sometimes be hard to see a glaring mistake, and it's because you've been looking at it for so long and you're so familiar with it. Timing and practicing out loud, I think practicing out loud is probably the key piece for me when it comes to good presentation delivery. If you sit with your work and your presentation, and if you only use the inner voice, right? So you're talking it through in your head, but you're not actually vocalizing it. If you vocalize it for the first time on the day of the conference, it sounds different because you are hearing something different. You're hearing your voice as opposed to your inner voice. Okay, so I would absolutely stand in front of a mirror, stand up in the middle of a room, and actually project it. Use your voice to work through your presentation. So on the day of the conference, when you speak, that's not the first time you're hearing it. Okay, it's the first time for us to hear it, but it shouldn't be the first time for you to hear it. And it gives you comfort and confidence in what you're communicating if that's how you operate. Okay. Again, avoid reading content because it's quite staged. Avoid excessive animations. Like, it's absolutely fine to use like a little video clip if people use that as a prompt within your presentation. That's maybe 30 or 40 seconds, but you've a small amount of time to get your information across. So by all means, use that time for you to explain the work. Um, Keep the text minimal. So that means the text on the slides, if you're using slides, because you're filling in the story. Um, Anticipate questions and prepare, and use your references. And by all means, share the Teams room link with your, like, so for your breakout room, share the links with your friends and your family. Classmates, like, we are more than happy for anybody belonging to you who would be there kind of rooting for you and in your corner, bring them along. We're more than happy for that to be the case. And we used to, when we ran this conference in person in the past, we used to do the same thing. We were more than happy for members of, you know, your community, members of your class, whoever it might be, to come in into the room and see your presentation, see the other presentations, and they might be interested in asking a question, whatever the case may be. Okay. So, okay, that's the kind of piece, I suppose, about the presentation. Let me just click here. Okay, that's perfect. Chat. Yeah, great. So, what I want to share with you now is kind of, I suppose, more of the practical piece. Now, what I would say to you in the first instance is we will get the schedule. So the schedule of when your talk is, when your presentation is, we'll get that schedule out to you today. Okay. The presentation. So what I'm going to show you now, if I click on here, and that's a little bit on the small side. Is really, I just want to show you what the schedule looks like for the day, okay? So you have a sense. And also, the expectation would be that you attend kind of more than just your 10-minute slot. So when you're in your parallel session, there'll either be 3 or 4 presentations in that session. So you need to stay in the space for that time. But we would expect that you'd come to the opening and also attend some of the other pieces that are happening within the day. Now, you might have a lecture you need to duck out to absolutely 100%, but please do attend the other components of the day. So you can see at 12 o'clock, that's where we have our opening, and we have a keynote address. And the keynote speaker this year is Oisin Hassan, who's working for the Irish Universities Association. Oisin's a great guy that I know from working in the area of student engagement, and I'm really looking forward to his keynote address to all of you. So that's when so the keynote address is kind of where we start the day. There's some questions and answers after the keynote address. And then at 1:05, you can see here, that's where we have our first live presentation session. Okay, so there are, as you can see, 4 breakout rooms. You can see there breakout 1, 2, 3, 4 as they go across the page. And that runs from 1:05 until 1:45. Okay, so that, if you happen to be in that session, that's the time that you need to be in your session, and you need to stay in the session. Aside from the fact that it's mannerly to stay in the session and support your other panelists, what can happen is on the day certain things happen, somebody mightn't turn up, somebody might have a connectivity issue, and what we'll do is we'll just pull on other people. So we'll pull on somebody else if it's a case that the person who was to go first is having some connectivity issues. We'll say, that's fine, look, you sort out those issues. The person who's due to be second, you can pop in now. So just in case there's a little bit of movement, now it doesn't happen very often that happens, but it is important that everyone is in the session at the beginning of the session and stays for the duration. At 10 to 2 then, we have a presentation from Gareth Marr, who is heads up the undergraduate awards, and they're global undergraduate awards, and he'll speak to you a little bit about if it was a case that you wanted to put your research further for another type of, this is more like, the undergraduate awards are more like a competition. He'll talk through what that's about. Then we have our next live presentation with 4 breakout rooms as well. And then the student panel that I made reference to at the beginning of the session, that happens at 10 to 3. That's just for half an hour, and that's where the students will come together and talk about all things research. And then we have our last breakout room, and our wrap up is at 4 o'clock. Okay, so that's kind of the layout of the day, just to give you a sense of that, and maybe some of you will have some questions about that. And as I said, the full schedule with your details in it and your times, we'll send that out by email later on today. I've included in here as well the link to the team site, which is the site we're in at the moment. If it's a case that you want to have that link, or if you want to go in and have a little look at the different channels that are within the site, it's fairly self-explanatory. Everything that I have noted there in the schedule, so the opening and the keynote address, that has a channel for you to go into. Each of the breakout rooms has its own channel, but we'll have those hyperlinked on the schedule as well. So it should be fairly straightforward, and you'll be signposted to the different places that you need to go. Okay, so I would imagine at this point in time that a lot of you will have used MS Teams for presentations. COVID threw us all into that kind of a space. But what I've done here is, I suppose I have just brought you through where you can find the team site. I've hyperlinked that as well as I have it in the previous slide. I've got the little icon there of what's on this actual team site, and I've given you a sense then as to the different channels that exist within the team site when you get in there. And what I've done then is I suppose just brought you through joining. Obviously, for those of you who are here today, you're familiar with that. But similarly, I suppose the piece that people may or may not have done before is the sharing piece. So if you have got some slides that you want to share with your audience, and what you want to do is you want to share your presentation the way that I'm sharing this now. So what you want to do is kind of listed here, and the icon that you're looking for is this share icon here, and you're selecting then from whatever windows that you have open, and that allows you to share your presentation with your audience. Okay. If anybody needs any more kind of content or is a little bit worried about any of that kind of technical stuff, I've included the resources here in relation to where you can go, the documentation for that's belonged to MS Teams that supports that. So both Rose and I have been in contact. Well, I have been in contact. There's been a couple of emails I've sent out to you. I've been in contact with a few of you where I've been responding to queries. But Rose has been in contact, and obviously they're both of our email addresses, as well as the CTL address and the web page link as to where we host all of the information for Aicur. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop the recording, and I am going to, bear with me a second.